So, Charlie, do you accept the View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time.
It didn't begin with a courtroom or a press release. It began with a smirk. On a regular weekday morning, millions of Americans tuned into The View, expecting another round of punchy banter, layered with political jabs and righteous rants. But what unfolded during that broadcast would ignite a media firestorm that reached far beyond the velvet couches of daytime television. The hosts had their sights set on the conservative youth organization Turning Point USA, which had just wrapped a major student summit in Tampa, Florida. Over 5,000 high school and college students from all over the country had paid their way to attend, eager to hear from conservative speakers and build a sense of community. But the mood shifted when Sunny Hostin, one of The View's most outspoken panelists, took the airwaves and made a stunning insinuation that the group had allowed neo-Nazis into their event. She didn't say it directly. She didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like smoke. The camera cut to a chuckling co-host. There was a pause, then a few eye rolls, and the conversation moved on like nothing had happened. But in the background, a reckoning was already being written. Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, wasn't watching casually. He was documenting. Within hours, his legal team drafted a cease and desist. Within days, he was speaking publicly about exploring a defamation lawsuit. The number, $100 million. That figure wasn't pulled from thin air. It was calculated, symbolic, and strategic. Because this wasn't just about a single insult. It was about 5,000 students, minors, college freshmen, young Americans who had chosen to spend their summer attending a political summit, and who now had to live with the stain of being associated with hate groups on national television. Imagine, you're 17 years old, just returned from what felt like a life-changing weekend, and a family friend calls you the next morning to ask why you were at a Nazi rally. That's not just offensive, it's damaging. It changes how people see you, how colleges see you, how future employers see you. And Kirk knew that this wasn't a tantrum in a press conference. This was legal strategy wrapped in cultural confrontation. One man against a media empire. And his message was clear. Say what you want about me, but don't drag thousands of kids through the mud to make a cheap point on TV. For years, programs like The View have blurred the line between commentary and character assassination. With a laugh track, a clap sign, and a latte in hand. They've managed to say things under the guise of opinion that would never hold up in a courtroom. This time, someone decided to call their bluff. The $100 million punch wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a shot across the bow of modern media. A statement that maybe those who speak to millions each day ought to carry more than confidence. They ought to carry responsibility. And when confidence meets accountability, the next thing that hits isn't applause. It's the subpoena. Now that the opening shot has been fired. The real question isn't whether The View meant to cause damage. It's what happens when that damage can't be walked back with a shallow apology. Because this story is just getting started. And what happened next outside the courtroom may matter even more than what happens inside it. The weekend in Tampa was supposed to be a celebration. Over 5,000 students, some still in high school, others fresh into college, had saved up, booked flights, packed their bags, and come together for one reason: to be part of something bigger than themselves. Turning Point USA's Student Action Summit promised connection, education, and energy. For many, it was their first political event, their first conference, even their first trip out of state alone. Inside the venue, things were electric. The air buzzed with speeches, debates, networking, and excitement. But just outside the convention center's doors, a very different kind of scene was unfolding. A group of individuals holding Nazi flags and banners had stationed themselves near the entrance. No one invited them, no one welcomed them, but they knew exactly what they were doing, positioning themselves close enough to the event to create a media moment. And that's exactly what happened. Photos of the Menande, where almost all men holding hate symbols, began circulating online. Context disappeared in seconds. Social media headlines quickly tied the image to the event inside. Some media outlets played it carefully, noting the group had no official affiliation with Turning Point USA. But then came The View. During a live segment, one of the hosts referenced the images and claimed that these individuals had been let in or somehow tolerated by the conference. Sunny Hostin in particular suggested complicity. There was no confirmation, no evidence, just a casual remark, said with certainty, on national television. That single moment became a tidal wave. The nuance that the hate group was outside, that they were denounced immediately by TPUSA, that the event had no connection to them whatsoever was drowned out by the drama. No matter how many statements Turning Point issued, no matter how many videos surfaced showing security turning the hate group away, the damage had been done. Because once a lie goes viral, the truth always arrives too late and without the same energy. To the students, this wasn't a political misunderstanding. It felt personal. They had sat through panels on free speech, engaged in respectful debate, and networked with peers. And now they were being labeled falsely as affiliated with white supremacy. Some received messages from classmates. Others were met with silence. From their own family members, the kind of silence that says, "I don't know what to believe anymore." This is the part people often miss. It's easy to assume that a talk show is just noise, that opinions shared between commercials don't have real consequences, but they do, especially when they target the young, the unprepared, and the unsuspecting. What happened in Tampa wasn't a clash of ideologies, it was a case study in how fast misinformation spreads when it fits a convenient narrative. And for Charlie Kirk, that was the breaking point. He could take being misquoted, he could take the jabs and name-calling aimed at him, but watching 5,000 students, many of whom he had encouraged, mentored, and welcomed become collateral damage in a political smear, that was different. That what began as a gathering of young voices looking for inspiration had now become a lightning rod for national fury. And as the headlines spun and the network stayed silent, Kirk began preparing a response that wasn't just reactive, it was deliberate, structured, and aimed straight at the machine that started it all. Because if truth can be twisted in an instant, then maybe, just maybe, it's time for someone to untwist it one legal motion at a time. And before this fight moves to the courtroom, it moves somewhere just as critical, into the question of what counts as protected speech and what crosses the line into defamation. That's where this story turns next. Free speech is sacred in America. It's one of the first things children learn about in school, the idea that you can say what you believe without fear of punishment. It's bold, beautiful, and deeply American. But what often gets lost in that patriotic promise is this: freedom of speech does not mean freedom from responsibility. That's where defamation comes in. Legally speaking, defamation is when someone makes a false statement about another person or a group that causes harm to their reputation. And here's the key difference: an opinion is protected, but a knowingly false statement that implies a harmful fact is not. Imagine a stranger posts online that you're a bad chef. That's an opinion, maybe even rude, but it's still protected speech. But if that same person posts that you poisoned a customer and knew it and you didn't, that's defamation. Because now they're not just sharing an opinion, they're telling others something false that can destroy your trust, your business, and your future. That's the line Charlie Kirk believes the View crossed when Sunny Hostin implied that Turning Point USA had let neo-Nazis into their conference, or, at the very least, tolerated them. She didn't frame it as speculation. She framed it as fact. She didn't say, "Some are wondering if ... double quotes, or it's unclear whether." No, she told a national audience that this group had been welcomed inside. That's a factual claim, and it wasn't true. That's why the legal gears started turning. Because this wasn't a vague insult. It wasn't even about Charlie Kirk personally. It was about a large group of young people, students who were swept into the firestorm without warning or defense. And this isn't the first time a defamation case like this has caught national attention. Back in 2019, a teenager named Nick Sandman became the center of a media frenzy after a short clip showed him wearing a MAGA hat while staring at a Native American activist. News outlets rushed to frame the story as an act of aggression, but full video footage later revealed that the truth was far more complicated, and Sandman ended up settling major lawsuits with CNN and the Washington Post for undisclosed amounts. Some reports estimated the settlements in the tens of millions of dollars. The lesson: big platforms don't get to say whatever they want about individuals, especially when what they say is untrue and damaging. What Charlie Kirk is doing now isn't just a reaction to being misrepresented. It's a statement to every major media outlet that the old rules, the ones that allowed viral slander to pass as casual commentary, might finally be changing. There's something powerful in that, not because it punishes speech, but because it protects the idea that speech should mean something, that facts matter, that reputations can't be trampled for the sake of a spicy segment. And if the View's words cost them millions, it won't be because they had an opinion. It'll be because they took that opinion and dressed it up as truth without checking the facts first. Which brings us to a deeper question. How did The View, a show meant to empower voices and explore nuance, turn into a stage for misinformation disguised as commentary? That unraveling begins where the drama really lives, inside the studio. It's easy to forget who gets hurt when the cameras turn off and the hosts move on. For most people watching The View, the segment about Turning Point USA came and went like any other hot take, sharp, smug, and gone before the next commercial break. But for the thousands of students who had just returned home from that summit in Tampa, those few words hit like a punch to the chest. These weren't public figures. They weren't celebrities or politicians with media teams to clean up the mess. They were 16, 17, 18-year-olds, some just entering adulthood, many attending their very first political event. They had gone to Florida full of energy, curiosity, and maybe even a little nervous excitement. For them, it wasn't about headlines. It was about being seen, being heard, and being part of something that made them feel like they belonged. Then, they woke up to the news. Screenshots flooded their phones. Friends sent messages asking, "Hey, weren't you at that Nazi thing?" Some were called out on social media. Others were quietly questioned at school. One student, a first year at a small liberal arts college, shared that her professor asked her in front of the class if she had any regrets about attending hate rallies. It didn't matter that the accusations were false. Once the label stuck, it became part of their digital footprint, forever searchable, forever misread by someone who never bothered to look deeper. Charlie Kirk knew exactly what this meant, not in theory. In practice, for years, he'd seen young conservatives afraid to speak up on campus, worried they'd be mocked, reported, or worse. But this time was different. This wasn't pushback from classmates or TikTok trolls. This was national television, a platform trusted by millions, and them of standing shoulder to shoulder with hate. The damage wasn't just reputational, it was emotional. How do you explain to your grandparents that the show they watch every morning just accused you of sympathizing with Nazis? How do you convince a college admissions officer or a future employer that you were at a leadership conference, not a fringe rally? This wasn't a policy debate. It was character assassination, and these students didn't have the resources to fight back. No lawyers, no PR teams, just a growing sense of shame and confusion that followed them home. That's why Kirk pushed forward. Not for headlines or vengeance, but because someone had to defend the kids who couldn't defend themselves. Someone had to stand up and say, these students showed up to learn, not to be vilified. And maybe that's the lesson here. That in today's media landscape, where a 5-second clip can define a person forever, the real victims are often the quietest, the ones just trying to find their way. The ones who thought being part of something meant something until the world decided to rewrite the story for them. But to understand how that story got twisted in the first place, we have to take a closer look at the machine behind the noise, the talk show that turned 5,000 students into political pawns in less than a minute. Because behind the jokes and applause, something more dangerous has been hiding in plain sight. There was a time when The View felt like a cozy kitchen table, conversations, strong personalities, yes, but grounded in heart and curiosity. It was a show built on the idea that women of different backgrounds could sit together, disagree, and still offer something thoughtful to the millions watching at home. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The table didn't shrink. The voices just got louder. Over time, The View evolved into something else entirely, part talk show, part gladiator arena. It's no longer about asking hard questions. It's about outperforming your co-hosts, outraging your rivals, and landing that perfect, viral one-liner before the next ad break. It's a format that rewards volume over value and treats every topic like a battlefield for claps, laughs, and clicks. Take the Turning Point USA moment. The accusation wasn't delivered with caution. It came with smirks, rolled eyes, and that unmistakable tone of, we already know the truth. And that's the problem. Because when satire crosses into slander, the audience doesn't always catch the line. What may feel like casual banter on set can land like a bombshell in real life. When Hostin confidently claimed that TPUSA had allowed neo-Nazis into their conference, it wasn't just a joke. It wasn't satire. It was a statement of fact, presented to millions, with no proof and no pushback from anyone at the table. There was no pause, no clarification, no invitation for nuance. Just an accusation dropped casually, like it didn't matter what came next. But it did matter, because people still trust that what's said on The View has some basis in truth. That's the power of media dressed as entertainment. And when that power gets misused, even for a second, the fallout ripples far beyond the studio. The View isn't alone in this. Cable news shows do it. Podcasts do it. Twitter does it in overdrive. But the reason The View hits differently is because it pretends to be something softer, something more sincere. And that's why the betrayal stings deeper when it fails to meet the standard it helped build. A student watching that show with her parents might hear those words and suddenly feel the urge to explain herself. A teacher might rethink writing a letter of recommendation. A stranger online might dig into your name and start making assumptions about who you are, based on nothing more than a throwaway remark on a midday talk show. So yes, The View still has a table, but it's not round anymore. It's a stage. A place where performance has replaced conversation, and being clever has taken priority over being careful. And when a platform like that gets reckless, people start asking, was it a joke or was it a hit job wrapped in designer? Sarcasm. That's why Charlie Kirk didn't just file a complaint. He threw down a challenge. One that forces us all to ask what kind of media we want to consume, what kind of responsibility we're willing to demand from those who speak into our homes every day. But to truly understand the stakes of that challenge, we need to look at the person at the center of the storm. Because behind the snark and sound bites, there's one voice on The View that didn't just stir the pot, she might have set the whole thing boiling. Sunny Hostin wasn't always a household name. Before she joined The View, she was a federal prosecutor, then a respected legal analyst. Her insights carried weight, and her sharp breakdowns of major cases earned her a seat at one of the most watched tables in America. She brought something different to the show, a kind of legal gravitas, a calm voice amid the chaos. But the irony is hard to ignore now, because when Sunny made the claim that Turning Point USA had allowed neo-Nazis into their student summit, She didn't sound like a prosecutor. She sounded like a commentator in a rush to win the room. There was no citation, no caveat, no pause. Just a confident delivery of a claim that, if untrue, could be considered defamation under the very laws she once practiced. That's what makes this so uncomfortable. When a legal expert steps into the public square and tosses out accusations without backing them up, it does more than hurt the people she's speaking about. It undermines the trust she built with her own audience. Viewers assume, perhaps reasonably, that Sunny knows the boundaries, that when she speaks, especially on legal matters, she's doing so with care. But that morning, there was no care, and the consequences followed quickly. Within days, ABC was hit with a cease and desist letter. Online backlash mounted. Critics demanded an apology. Eventually one came, but it was short, vague, and buried inside another episode. Hardly the public reckoning many were hoping for. Meanwhile, legal analysts began weighing in. Could this really turn into a defamation case? Was Sunny, the lawyer on set, about to become part of the legal story instead of just narrating it? The truth is, no one knows yet. But the possibility is no longer off the table. If Kirk follows through and files the suit, Hostin could be named directly. And if that happens, she wouldn't be holding the mic, she'd be answering questions. Under oath. On the record, for someone who built her brand on dissecting courtroom drama, there's a bitter twist in potentially becoming part of one. That's not something to celebrate or mock. It's something to reflect on. Because this isn't about rooting against a person, it's about realizing that everyone, no matter how educated or accomplished, is capable of slipping into the comfort of unchecked confidence, especially on a platform that rarely pushes back. And that's the real takeaway here. Credibility is earned slowly, but it can be lost in a single sentence. Now, as Sunny Hostin faces the fallout not just from viewers, but potentially from a courtroom, her story becomes a turning point in this saga, a symbol of what happens when expertise is used recklessly, and trust becomes collateral damage. But Sunny isn't the only one navigating damage control. Behind the cameras, a much bigger storm is brewing, one that could shake the entire foundation of The View itself. Because as the spotlight shifts from one host to the network behind them, the question becomes, how deep does the crisis go? When a mistake is made on live television, it happens in seconds. But behind the scenes, cleaning it up can take weeks. Sometimes longer, and, in some cases, the damage never really disappears. After Sunny Hostin's on-air claim about Turning Point USA, the fallout didn't just land on her lap. It rolled directly into the executive offices at ABC. Producers started making calls. Legal teams were looped in. Emails flew back and forth between departments labeled urgent and priority, potential liability. Internally, some staff began combing through the tape, double-checking the segment, quietly scrubbing clips from social platforms. Meanwhile, a separate team worked on crafting the right tone for a public response, one that sounded apologetic, but not too apologetic. One that could quiet the storm without admitting to a legal breach. That's the dance media companies know all too well, especially when the trouble doesn't come from an outsider, but from one of their own. According to whispers from within the studio, producers of The View weren't just rattled, they were frustrated, not just with the backlash, but with how quickly it escalated. The truth is, this kind of commentary, blunt, emotional, sometimes careless, isn't rare on the show. It's baked into the format. A fast-paced discussion table, 5 different voices, minimal fact-checking in real time, and an audience that claps at the sharpest jab, not the smartest point. But this time, it got out of hand. When a conservative student group gets falsely linked to neo-Nazis, and then responds, not with a tweet, but with legal counsel and a $100 million figure, network lawyers have no choice but to take it seriously. ABC's legal department began reviewing old episodes, flagging moments that could be legally questionable if re-examined. Producers were reminded off the record to be more cautious with how certain segments are framed. Behind the camera, the mood shifted from casual to careful. No one was quite sure how far Kirk would go, or whether a full lawsuit would land on their desks, but everyone knew the spotlight had turned inward. And that's when TV stops being entertainment and starts becoming exposure. In the midst of all this, something else started to crack. Trust between the hosts and the people managing them. Trust between the network and the public. Even trust within the team itself. There were quiet conversations in dressing rooms, nervous glances during rehearsal, and more than a few people began asking questions out loud that, just weeks earlier, would have been whispered. Are we protected? Are we next? Because in media, the script is clear. Ratings matter until they become a risk, and in those moments, no one is too big to fall, not even daytime TV royalty. The lesson here isn't about silencing strong voices. It's about knowing when strong voices start speaking for a brand that might not be able to afford their mistakes, when a single sentence said too fast, too confidently, can create a snowball of consequences no producer can outrun. As ABC quietly scrambled to keep things under control, Charlie Kirk's team did something else. They stayed public. They kept speaking. They went on air, gave interviews, pushed the conversation forward strategically, reminding everyone watching that they weren't going to just walk away with an apology, because while ABC tried to contain the flames inside its walls, Kirk had his eyes on something much bigger, not just one talk show, but the entire culture it represents. And that's where this story stretches far beyond The View into the heart of how media shapes the public mind. If you want to understand how we got here, how a few careless words on a daytime talk show turned into a potential $100 million lawsuit, you have to look beyond the headlines and into the machine that made them possible. Television today isn't just about informing people, it's about holding their attention. And, in an age where attention means profit, the surest way to keep people watching is outrage. Outrage is easy. It's emotional, immediate, and addictive. It doesn't require research, or balance, or context. All it needs is a villain and someone loud enough to call them out, preferably with a punchline. The View didn't invent this formula, but it's mastered it. And like many shows built around a panel of strong personalities, it's evolved into a kind of echo chamber one, where shared opinions get louder, opposing ones get scoffed at, and everyone in the room already agrees. Before the discussion even begins, the louder the gasp, the more viral the clip. Ratings follow outrage like bees to honey. Every sharp insult becomes a moment to cut for YouTube. Every dramatic sigh becomes a meme. Every accusation, whether grounded or not, becomes a headline, which becomes engagement, which becomes money. That's the cycle. And at the center of that cycle are real people like the 5,000 students from TPUSA, whose reputations were dragged into the whirlwind, not because of what they did, but because of what they symbolized. They became easy targets in a game where the scoreboard isn't truth, it's reach. You see this pattern everywhere. On cable news, on social media, in politics. The world gets divided into teams, and once someone's on the other side, it becomes acceptable, almost expected, to assume the worst about them. Nuance disappears. Assumptions fill the gaps. And in that environment, a sentence like "they let Nazis into their event" isn't challenged. It's applauded. It fits the narrative. It feeds the moment. But moments have consequences, and this one may have gone too far. Because what The View underestimated was that people are starting to pay attention. They're getting tired of being talked down to, tired of being told what to think, tired of watching truth get steamrolled by cleverness. And some, like Charlie Kirk, are starting to push back, not with tweets, but with legal filings. That pushback doesn't just aim to correct one wrong, it questions the entire structure. The whole model that rewards shock over substance, that uses real people as props for punchlines, that treats misrepresentation as a minor fee for higher ratings. And here's what's worth remembering. Disagreement is healthy, passionate debate is valuable, but when disagreement becomes distortion, and passion turns into punishment, something essential gets lost. Trust. The media isn't just entertainment. It helps shape how people see the world, and more importantly, how they see each other. When that role is abused, whether for laughs or likes, the damage is real. As this lawsuit moves forward, or, even if it stalls, the bigger question remains. What kind of conversations are we having as a country, and who gets to shape them? Because this wasn't just about a few bad minutes on television, it was a reflection of something deeper. And to see where that reflection leads, we need to take a closer look at the man who launched the challenge and what he's really trying to build beyond the courtroom. When Charlie Kirk stepped in front of the cameras and announced he was considering a $100 million lawsuit against The View, reactions split instantly. To his supporters, it was a long overdue stand, someone finally saying, enough. To a media world that had gotten far too comfortable with slander, to his critics, it looked like theater, a PR stunt, a way to rile up the base, sell some books, maybe land a few more speaking gigs. But if you strip away the noise, the motives, whatever they may be, don't change. The deeper question, was he right to do it? Kirk has never been shy about controversy. As the founder of Turning Point USA, he's made a name by walking directly into hostile college campuses, challenging dominant narratives, and defending conservative values in places where they're often unwelcome. He's used boldness as a tool and sometimes a shield, but this moment felt different. This time, it wasn't about ideology or political theater. It was personal, not just for him, but for the 5,000 young people who traveled, often on their own dime, to attend a summit that had nothing to do with hate, and everything to do with finding purpose and community. When Sonny Hostin went on national television and casually implied that his event had welcomed neo-Nazis, Kirk saw more than a media misstep. He saw a line being crossed. And this time, he wasn't content to issue a tweet or a statement. He wanted to draw that line in court. Some might call it performative. But if it was a performance, it was one with real legal risk, and a real message, because lawsuits like this don't come cheap. They take time, resources, patience, and they open the door to scrutiny, discovery, and long public battles. You don't file something like this just to get your name in the paper for a day or two. Do it to make a point that sticks. And Kirk's point is this. When media platforms casually destroy reputations for laughs or ratings, there ought to be consequences. especially when those reputations belong to students, young people without PR teams or law degrees to defend themselves. Whether you agree with Kirk politically or not, it's hard to ignore the principle underneath the lawsuit, that maybe we've all let the rules slip a little too far, that maybe calling something just an opinion isn't enough when it leaves lasting scars. In that sense, this isn't just about defending his organization, it's about drawing a line in the sand for how we talk about each other in public life. It's a gamble, no doubt. The case could stall or fail. It could be dismissed or settled quietly. And critics will continue to say it was all for show. But even if it is a show, it's one that's asking uncomfortable questions and forcing powerful people to answer them. And now, as the spotlight turns back to The View and the network behind it, one final question still lingers. What happens when the show's biggest audience isn't clapping but watching with a courtroom transcript in hand? Because if this ends up being more than a media moment, if it becomes a turning point, then the consequences won't just land on one talk show, they'll echo all the way through the industry. Talk shows are supposed to be a little messy. That's part of the appeal. The overlapping voices, the playful arguments, the occasional awkward moment. People don't watch The View for polished policy debates. They watch it for spark, personality, and unpredictability. But when unpredictability crosses into irresponsibility, the stage doesn't feel so harmless anymore. That's where this story lands. At the intersection between performance and accountability, for years, The View and shows like it have operated in a unique space. Not quite news, not quite entertainment, somewhere in between. A place where opinions are offered like facts, and facts are often bent to fit a feeling. And in that blurry middle ground, reputations have become fair game. This time, though, the person on the receiving end of the damage didn't just swallow it. Charlie Kirk fought back, not with another tweet, not with a viral clip, but with something. Talk shows can't edit or laugh off a legal strategy. Backed by evidence, and grounded in the idea that truth should still matter even on daytime TV. When The View implied that neo-Nazis were welcomed at a student conference, they weren't just joking or riffing. They were shaping a public perception, one that spread far and fast, reaching into homes, college campuses, and job interviews. One that took seconds to say and might take years to undo. That's the weight of modern media. Because what's said on a screen doesn't stay on a screen, it follows people. It lives online. It alters reputations, relationships, and realities. And maybe that's the deeper lesson in all of this. That talk shows are no longer just casual conversation. They're culture. They set the tone for how millions of people think, speak, and argue. And if they're going to play that role, then they can't keep hiding behind the excuse of, we were just talking. There's a cost to carelessness, a cost that 5,000 students now understand all too well. So as this story moves forward through legal filings, media responses, and public debates, not just a fight between Charlie Kirk and The View, it's a mirror, held up to every platform, every panel, every voice that's gotten used to talking without consequences. The next time someone shrugs off a false accusation as just TV, they might think twice, because what happened here was a reminder that even in the world of talk shows and hot takes, words still matter. And sometimes, the bill for careless ones shows up not with applause, but with a subpoena. And now, with the lines drawn and the stage no longer safe, only one question remains. Will this be a media moment we forget or a media reckoning? We remember what started as a few careless words on a daytime talk show turned into a national flashpoint, one that pulled 5,000 students, a media empire, and a political firebrand into the same spotlight. From Nazi flag rumors to a $100 million lawsuit, from viral outrage to real legal consequences, this story wasn't just about Charlie Kirk or The View. It was about the cost of turning opinion into accusation. At its heart, this is a reminder. Words matter, especially when you speak to millions. Whether you're sitting behind a news desk, a talk show table, or a social media feed, there's a line between criticism and character assassination. And once it's crossed, there's no turning back. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, informative, or even just thought-provoking, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.